All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. This is Kate Fuller, and we're going to go through the Farm Bill agent training. So a couple of things before we get started. We had one question in the sign-up about trainings, and if we were going to do some in-person trainings like we did last time. We are not. So this Farm Bill is relatively similar to the last one. So there isn't quite the depth of coverage that we need to do this time around. And there is also not the funding that we received last time. So that makes doing that kind of intense travel a little less feasible. But we do have Amanda Ness, who's a program specialist with FSA, here to go through a lot of the kind of detail and the changes from the last round of the Farm Bill. She's going to go through that first, and then I'll go through some of the data and the available decision tools that we have. I know we had some questions about those as well. So please feel free to ask as many questions as you want in the chat window. This is the first time that I have done a live webinar with this, so bear with us all. Yeah, so feel free to ask questions. Amanda's gonna go through her portion for a little while here, and then we'll take a quick break, and I'll take over. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Amanda Ness with FSA.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for getting on today's call. I'm just going to go through kind of a condensed version of what we did during the public meetings when we went out and did some public meetings throughout the state. Feel free to ask me questions as I go through this. If you want more details, I'm happy to provide those to you. Okay. So I'm going to be covering the agriculture risk coverage and price loss coverage programs. This is one of the main programs that I administer at the state office in Bozeman. We currently are underway with our 2019 and 2020 program election and enrollment period for the ARCPLC program. The election period, the deadline to make your election is March 15th of 2020, and that election is going to be in effect for the 2019 and 2020 crop years. There is an ARCPLC enrollment period happening right now for 2019. The deadline for producers to enroll in that program is March 15th, 2020 as well. And then the 2020 enrollment period runs through June 30th. There is also a yield update opportunity under this Farm Bill. And the deadline that they have to do that is September 30th of 2020. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more here as I go through the slides today. This next slide shows our covered commodities for the ARCPLC program. These covered commodities are all the same as they were under the previous Farm Bill, with the addition of seed cotton, which doesn't really make any difference for us here in Montana, but otherwise these are the same covered commodities that we had before. Covered commodities are the crops for which producers can have base acres on their farm, and they are the commodities that drive the payments for the ARCPLC program. So we have to have base acres of one or more of these covered commodities on a farm in order for producers to earn ARC or PLC payments. This next section, I'm going to just kind of go over some of the big changes that we see between the two Farm Bills. This is just kind of a general overview of those changes, and we'll talk a little bit more about a lot of these as I go through my presentation. So we still have our three program options. Those have not changed. We have the price loss coverage program, the agriculture risk coverage program with the county option, and the agriculture risk coverage with the individual option. So these are the three programs that producers have to make the decision as to which one they want to participate in for the covered commodities on their farms. The program election under the 2014 Farm Bill, producers had to make a program election for their farms, and that election remained on the farm for the life of the Farm Bill. They did not have the opportunity to change that Farm Bill no matter what happened. For the 2018 Farm Bill, we are having our producers come in and make a program election for 2019, and that program election is going to apply for the 2020 crop year as well. However, a really positive change that they made in this Farm Bill is that they're allowing producers to come in and change their program election annually beginning in 2021. So that's a really positive change because it gives producers the opportunity to decide on an annual basis what program would be more beneficial for them to enroll in for the year. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, there was language that said that if a producer did not make a 2014 program election, then that farm would default into the PLC program and that farm would not be eligible for any 2014 payments. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, we have similar language. So producers have to come in and make a program election for 2019. If they fail to make a valid program election, then they will default into whatever program they had on their farm under the previous Farm Bill, and they won't be eligible for any 2019 payments. So it's really important that our producers come in and make their program elections prior to that March 15th deadline. There is a yield update opportunity under this Farm Bill, and there was under the 2014 Farm Bill as well. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, producers could come in and update their PLC yields using their yields from 2008 through 2012. They would just come in and certify their yield, and then we multiplied that by 90% once we did an average of those yields, and that would become their new yield update. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, we're doing a similar process. Producers are coming in and certifying their yields, and as of now, it's just a yield certification. Those certified yields are subject to spot check, but we're looking at the crop years 2013 through 2017. The producers come in and certify their yields. We multiply that by 90%, just like we did under the 2014 Farm Bill, but we do have an additional yield adjustment factor that we're applying under this Farm Bill, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more once I get into the yield update portion of this presentation. These updated yields that we're talking about for the 2018 Farm Bill will come into effect for the 2020 crop year moving forward through the Farm Bill. So for 2019 payments, we're going to go ahead and use the PLC yields that currently exist on the farm. This grass idle fallow language, this is something completely new. We didn't have anything even remotely like this under the 2014 Farm Bill, but under this Farm Bill, there is language that says that if we have a farm that was reported 100% as grass, idle, or fallow during the years 2009 through 2017, those farms are not eligible for any ARCPLC payments under this Farm Bill. However, they did come up with a new program that's administered through NRCS, and that's called the Grassland Conservation Initiative, and we call it GCI. That program is available for these farms that are now ineligible for ARCPLC. They can go sign a contract with NRCS and earn $18 per acre for a 5-year contract period. So although these farms are no longer eligible for ARCPLC, they did open up another program opportunity for these farms that are planted to grass or fallow. Trend-adjusted yields, this is something new that we're pulling into this Farm Bill. We didn't have this in the 2014 Farm Bill at all. And basically, trend-adjusted yields are used by RMA, and so we're going to start using them too. For our ARC programs, the Agriculture Risk Coverage programs, we have to establish benchmark revenues, and I'm going to talk about that more in a little bit. But when we look at those benchmark revenues, we're looking at 5 years worth of data. And so if RMA is applying these trend-adjusted yields, then we're going to apply them as well. And the purpose of these yields is to account for increases in yields through the years due to improved crop genetics or cultural practices. So, but basically for FSA, the trigger for us to apply these trend-adjusted yields is if RMA is, then we will as well. A lot of the changes that I'm going to review actually happened to the Arc County program. That's definitely the program that we see the most changes in under this Farm Bill. And this slide shows the first one. For the Arc County program, we have to have county yields established in order to determine what payments are going to be. And under the 2014 Farm Bill, we looked at Ness. That was the data that we used first to set those yields. If there wasn't any Ness data available, then we would look at RMA data, and then if there was no RMA data, then the state committee for FSA would be tasked with setting those county yields. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, they made the decision to kind of flip-flop our data source. So our first source of data that we're going to be looking at to set these county yields is going to be RMA, and then if RMA data isn't available, then we'll look to NAS, and then finally the state committee will be setting those yields if there is no RMA or NAS data. For all of these programs in general, we do not treat irrigated and non-irrigated practices of the crop differently. But for Arc County, there is procedure that allows for us to calculate separate revenues for irrigated and non-irrigated practices of the crop. However, certain criteria has to be met in order for us to do that. If this criteria is not met, then we will just use a blended irrigated and non-irrigated yield and price. So for the 2014 Farm Bill, our irrigated and non-irrigated policy was basically, we looked at our FSA records, and if during the years 2008 through 2013, if we had at least 25% of the crop in the county reported as irrigated and 25% of the crop in the county reported as non-irrigated, then that county met the criteria to have separate revenues calculated for irrigated and non-irrigated practices of that specific crop. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, we're doing something similar, but they've made it a little bit, they've kind of broadened it so that more counties would meet the criteria. And the first step that we do for the 2018 Farm Bill is we look at our RMA data, and we're looking at that data from 2013 through 2017. And if we look at those years and we see that RMA has yield data for 3 of those 5 years, then that county is going to meet the criteria to have separate irrigated and non-irrigated revenues calculated. If that criteria isn't met, then we're going to look at our FSA records, and if we have at least 10% irrigated and 10% non-irrigated of that crop in the county, and we had 5,000 acres on average planted in each year during 2013 through 2017, then again that county will meet the criteria to have separate revenues calculated. What that means is basically that we would treat the irrigated practice as one crop and the non-irrigated practice as a second crop, and those two, they could trigger independently of each other. So this next slide shows the counties and crops that have met the criteria to have those separate revenues calculated. So you can see here that a large portion of Montana has met that criteria to have separate irrigated and non-irrigated revenues calculated for wheat. That's definitely the one that we're seeing most throughout the state. You also see a lot of barley that met that criteria, and then there's some corn and dry peas in some counties as well. So one thing to note about this policy, though, is that they're going to continue to reevaluate that criteria going through the Farm Bill. So these crops and counties could definitely change as we move forward through the years, depending on how much is irrigated and non-irrigated moving forward. Here's another big change for the Arc County program. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, we always use the administrative location of the land to determine the Arc County payment rate. So, for example, if we have a farm that is administered out of the Gallatin County FSA office, but there might be land within that farm that's physically located in Gallatin County and Jefferson County, under the 2014 Farm Bill, we would issue payments to that farm based on the administrative location of the farm which would be the Gallatin County rates. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, they are now telling us that we have to issue payments based on the physical location of the land. So what that means for that same farm that I used earlier, where some of the land is physically located in Gallatin and some of it's physically located in Jefferson, we would have to look at the revenues from each of those physical location counties, and we would have to do a weighted revenue calculation for this specific farm. And the result will be that this farm would have a unique payment rate that will be different from any other farm that's located in the Gallatin County office. So that is a big change that we're going to see in the ARC County program. As I mentioned before, we have to calculate benchmark revenues for the ARC programs, and this is applicable to ARC County and ARC IC. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, we looked, in order to calculate those benchmark revenues, we looked at the immediately preceding 5 years. So if we were trying to calculate a benchmark for the 2017 crop year, we would look at price and yield data from 2012 to 2016. Under the 2018 Farm Bill, we've established a lag year, is what we're calling it. So we're going to skip the year immediately preceding the current year, and then we're going to use the 5 years worth of data prior to that. So for example, if we're looking at a 2020 benchmark, we're going to skip our 2019 data, and we're going to use the data from 2014 to 2018. Again, this is a benefit to producers because it allows us to establish those benchmarks earlier so that producers can know what the guarantee is in that county before they make their program election. So this is a really positive change as well. The enrollment deadline is a big change, and this is one that we're really trying to drive home with our producers, because under the 2014 Farm Bill, producers could come in and enroll beginning November 1st, and they had until August 1st to come in and make their enrollment. And annual enrollment is still required under this Farm Bill. However, the deadline is much earlier. So for 2019, since we're kind of doing this a little bit late, producers have until March 15th of 2020 to complete their 2020 or their 2019 enrollment, and they have until June 30th to complete their 2020 enrollment. But then beginning in 2021, we start our regular enrollment schedule, which is going to begin sometime in October, and then it's going to run through March 15th. So we're taking what used to be an August 1st deadline, and we now have a March 15th deadline. So that's significantly earlier. It's definitely going to be a big change for our producers to get used to. All right, I don't see any questions that have come up in the chat. Oh, now I see one. Okay, so the first question is if we have any stats for what percentage of producers have elected ARC County, ARC IC, or PLC in the 2014 Farm Bill. And this is something that Kate is going to cover under her portion. I don't have those with me right now, but Kate will definitely be covering that. I can tell you now, in Montana for this Farm Bill, we are seeing significantly more PLC in Montana. About 95% of our producers who have currently made elections for this Farm Bill have chosen PLC. There's very little ARC IC participation, and about 5% or 4.7% is in ARC County. So overwhelmingly, people are choosing PLC, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I get into the PLC discussion. But overall, nationwide last year, or last Farm Bill, we didn't see a lot of ARC IC participation. They're expecting there to be more ARC IC participation under this Farm Bill because of how much prevented planted that there was throughout the nation. But I will talk about all those programs a little bit more here in a minute. Good question. PLC yield update. As I mentioned before, we do have the opportunity for people to update their PLC yields. On a farm that is eligible for ARCPLC, they have to have base acres of the covered commodities in order to be eligible for this program. Any crop that has base acres on a farm is going to have a PLC yield associated with that crop. So producers have the opportunity under this Farm Bill to either retain the current PLC yield that exists on their farm or to update their PLC yield. And we're going to talk about that here in the coming slides. One important thing to note with this yield update is that the landowner has to be the one to make that decision. So the farm operator can come in and certify to the yields, but the landowner has to be the one to sign off on actually updating that yield. So they get to make the decision. Do they want to update their yield or keep what's currently on the farm? They get to make that decision on a covered commodity by covered commodity basis. So that means that if it's beneficial for them to update their wheat yield but not their barley yield, they can do that on a crop by crop basis. They don't have to update for all if they do it for one. As I mentioned before, the updated yields will be in effect beginning with crop year 2020 and going through crop year 2023. So we know for sure that they'll stay on the farm for at least this farm bill. The updated yield will only be used for PLC payments. It's called a PLC yield. We only use it for that program. However, we're still encouraging our producers to come in and take advantage of this opportunity regardless of which program they're going into, because this is going to become the yield on their farm for that commodity. We don't know what future programs might be in farm bills that come in the coming years, but this will become their yield. So if it's beneficial for them to update their yield, they should definitely come in and do it regardless of program participation. I do have a question that came up that is asking if alfalfa, sandfoin, or hay will be a covered crop, and no, those alfalfa hay is not a covered crop under this program. I think it was my second slide had all of our covered commodities. Our biggest players in Montana are wheat, barley, corn, etc. We are lucky in Montana that we have almost all of the covered commodities. We don't have rice or cotton or peanuts, but we do have all of these other commodities somewhere in Montana. But yeah, if you want to refer back to that second slide, that one will list all of our covered commodities. Okay, so our yield update calculation for this farm bill is that producers are going to come in and certify their yields for the 2013 through 2017 crop year. We're going to do a simple average of those, and we're only going to look at planted years. So if they didn't plant the crop in all of the years, we're only going to look at the years that they did plant the crop. We're going to do a simple average of those certified yields, and then we're going to multiply it by 90%. And then we're going to apply an additional yield adjustment factor to that calculation. The way that we determine that national yield adjustment factor is we look at the national average yield per acre of the crop during the 2008 through 2012 crop year, and we divide that by the national average yield per acre for the 2013 through 2017 crop year. That ratio is always going to be between 90 and 100%. So we're never going to see it go any less than 90%. This next slide shows the yield adjustment factors that have been established. So you can see here for wheat, the additional yield adjustment factor is 95.45%. Then we have barley that came in at 94.37. Corn is at 90%. So these are the additional yield adjustment factors that are going to be applied. And I'm going to show you an example of how this is going to work. But before I do that, I do want to talk about substitute yields, because we do have the opportunity for substitute yield to be used in this calculation. This is really going to be used in two different scenarios. So the first scenario will be if the landowner certifies to a yield that is significantly low, if they had a bad year, then we would allow them to use a substitute yield in this calculation. Or there might be situations where the crop was planted on the farm in a year, which we will know that based on our records, but maybe the landowner has changed and they don't have access to the production records from whoever had the farm before. So in that case, those owners could certify to a zero yield, and then we would give them the substitute yield when we do our calculation. The substitute yield is going to be 75% of the 2013 through 2017 county average yield for that specific covered commodity. So those are established for each county and each commodity in that county. So this slide is going to show an example of how we will be doing the yield update process. In this example, we have wheat that was planted in all 5 years of the yield update period. The current yield on this farm is 36 bushels. So you can see along this top line, or this top row, that we have the producer's certified yields. He certified the yields of 45, 40, 38, 42, and 10 bushels. Then we have our substitute yield down below, which is 26.27. So in each year, we're going to compare the actual yield to the substitute yield, and we're going to give the producer the higher of those two numbers. So you can see that in all years, 2013 through 16, the actual yield is higher than the substitute yield. But in 2017, the actual yield was significantly low. We're looking at a 10 bushel yield for 2017. And so in that example, we're going to apply the substitute yield in our calculation instead of giving him that lower yield of 10 bushels. So we just do a simple average of all of these yields. So we add them all together and come up with 191.27. We're going to divide that by 5 years worth of data, and that's going to give us an average yield of 38.25 bushels. Then we're going to apply our 90%, which is the required percentage that we have to apply, and then we're going to apply that additional yield adjustment factor that I talked about on the previous slide. So for wheat, that was 95.45%. So when we apply those two percentages, that gives us an updated yield of 33 bushels per acre for this farm. So in this example, it would not be beneficial for this landowner to update his yield because his current yield is 36 bushels, and going through our formula, his updated yield would only be 33 bushels. So this producer would likely not choose to update their yield. So here's a second example, and in this example we're looking at barley, and in this example it was only planted in 3 of the 5 years. So we're not even going to pay attention to those last 2 years. We're just going to look at the 3 years that the crop was planted. And this is a good example of a situation where maybe this landowner didn't have access to the production records from 2013 to 2015. Maybe it was a different operator or whatever those circumstances might be. That landowner has come in and certified to 0 yields in all of those, in all 3 years that the crop was planted. So that's going to trigger us to give him the substitute yield in all of those 3 years. So the substitute yield is 44.33 bushels. Since that's what we're using in all 3 years, that's going to give us an average of 44.33. And then we apply our percentages. So we take our average multiplied by 90% and multiplied by that national yield adjustment factor for barley, which was 94.37%. That's going to give us an updated yield for this farm of 38 bushels per acre. Comparing that to the current yield of 35, it would definitely be a benefit to this producer to update their yield. This is a really good example of a situation where it's beneficial for this producer to update their yield just using the substitute yield that's established in the county. So that is definitely a possibility. I just can't stress enough how important it is for producers to come in and sit down with the county office and go through this calculation to see if it would be a benefit to them. Because it definitely is something they want to take advantage of if they can. Back to the question about the covered commodities, I referred to the second slide, and I understand that you guys don't have those slides in front of you to refer back to those. Kate will share with you guys my slides, so you guys will have access to those if you would like them. Okay, I'm just going to talk for a couple minutes about program election. Producers do have the opportunity to choose a program election for the covered commodities on their farm. If they're choosing to go into the ARC County or PLC program, they can choose that on a crop by crop basis. So they could choose to go into PLC for their wheat and ARC County for their barley. They have that option to kind of mix and match those programs between the crops that they have base acres for on their farm. But if they go into ARC-IC, then that automatically applies to all of the covered commodities on their farm. They don't have that option of mixing or matching if they choose that program election. For the 2019 program election, that has to be made by the 2019 producers on the farm. So that means anyone with a share of the cropland in 2019 has to come in and sign to that program election. That may or may not be the same producers who are on the farm for 2020. However, that program election made by the 2019 producers is going to remain on that farm through the 2020 crop year. So the 2020 producers are subject to that election that is being made by the 2019 producers on the farm. The decision must be unanimous between all of those 2019 producers in order for it to be considered a valid election. If we do not have a valid election made for the 2019 crop year, then that farm is going to default into whatever program was in effect on their farm under the 2014 Farm Bill, and they will not be eligible to earn any 2019 payments for that farm. So it is, I mean, I just really like to stress how important it is for the producer to come in before March 15th and make that program election for 2019. And as I mentioned before, this is a really positive change. Even though that initial program election will be in effect for 2019 and 2020, after that, producers have the option to come in on an annual basis and change their program election. So beginning in 2021, they have that option to change their mind, and they can do that on an annual basis if they choose to do so. The election period for each of those 3 years, it runs concurrently with the enrollment period for the year. So they have from October until March 15th to come in and change their program election if that's what they choose to do. So that's all I have about program election. Now I am just going to kind of go through each of the 3 program options a little bit. I don't get super deep into the actual payment calculations. I just am going to generally cover those. If you want more details about those those payment calculations, we do have longer webinars that go much more into those details, or you can reach out to Kate, who can reach out to me, and we can get you the information that you'd like. The first program that I'm going to talk about is the Price Loss Coverage Program, which we refer to as PLC. This program offers price protection only, so we're just looking at prices in this program when we determine if payments are going to trigger, and we're looking at those prices at a national level. So we're looking at national marketing year average prices when we decide if a PLC payment is going to trigger. Basically, to put it very generally, payments are going to trigger for this program when the marketing year average price for the year falls below the effective reference price for the specific covered commodity. A couple things to note about participation in the PLC program. Producers are not required to plant the covered commodity in order to earn a payment. So basically, if a farm has base acres of wheat on their farm that they have enrolled into the PLC program and wheat triggers a payment, then that farm will earn a PLC payment for wheat, assuming all the other eligibility requirements have been met. Because we're just looking at prices in this program, production certification is not required. So the producer does not have to come in and tell us what their yields are on an annual basis for this program. Payment acres for PLC are going to be 85% of the specific covered commodities base acres on the farm. So if the farm has 100 base acres of wheat, we're going to pay them on 85 of those base acres. The effective price for PLC is going to be the higher of the current year marketing year average price or the national loan rate. So whichever of those is higher is what we will use as our effective price for the year. Reference prices. These are statutory reference prices, and they are the same reference prices that we had under the 2014 Farm Bill. So the reference price for barley is $4.95 per bushel. Wheat, we're looking at $5.50 per bushel. We have them listed on this slide for all of our different covered commodities. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, PLC was very simple. If the effective price fell below this reference price, then we triggered a payment for PLC. So for example, if the reference price for wheat is $5.50 per bushel, if the current year price came in at $5, then we would have a 50-cent PLC payment rate. They have come up with a new term for the 2018 Farm Bill that kind of complicates the program, but it's still fairly simple. We have what we call now an effective reference price. And this is actually a good change, even though it complicates the program a little bit, because it's going to allow for that reference price to be a little bit higher in year if we start to see a trend where the marketing year average prices are becoming significantly higher than the current reference price that we have established under the statute. So in order to have the effective reference price go up, we need to look at this formula that I have listed on this slide, and we really need to look at the very bottom part first. So our first step is to look at a 5-year Olympic average marketing year average price. So just like when I talked about the ARC benchmark calculations, we're going to establish a lag year here. So if we're looking at an effective reference price for 2019, we're going to skip our 2018 price, and then we're going to look at the 5 years prior to that. We're going to do an Olympic average of those marketing year average prices, and then we're going to multiply it by 85%. We're going to compare that to our current reference price, and whichever of those is higher is what we're going to move forward with. So basically, if 85% of that 5-year Olympic average is higher than the reference price, then that will allow our reference price to be higher than what I had listed on the previous slide. I'm going to show you an example of that that will hopefully make it a little bit easier to understand. So we're looking at our effective reference price for wheat. And so like I said, we're going to skip our 2018 crop year, and we're going to look at the marketing year average prices from 2013 to 2017. And I have those listed on this slide. Once we know what all those prices are, we're going to drop our high and our low values in 2013 and 2016. Then we'll average the remaining 3 values, which gives us our Olympic average marketing year average price of $5.20. We're then going to multiply that by 85%, which is going to give us a value of $4.42. So I carry that down here into our formula. So 85% of the 5-year Olympic average is $4.42. Now we're going to compare it to our reference price of $5.50. The reference price that we currently have set in statute is higher than 85% of that 5-year Olympic average. So our reference price for wheat for 2019 is going to remain unchanged. We're still working with that $5.50 effective reference price. So what that means is that for 2019, if the price for wheat, if that marketing year average price for wheat comes in less than $5.50, we will trigger a PLC payment rate for wheat in 2019. Let's just say, though, for example purposes, that the price of wheat continues to climb through the years. And so suddenly when we go through this calculation, let's just say that this number here, 85% of the 5-year Olympic average, let's say that comes in at $7. So in that example, we would compare $7 to our current reference price of $5.50, and we're going to use the greater of those 2 values, which in this case would be $7. But then we're going to compare it to 115% of the reference price, which is $6.33, and the lesser of those 2 values would become our effective reference price. So that would then cap that at $6.33. The reason why I wanted to go through that hypothetical example is because I want to demonstrate that no matter what happens with the prices over the years, the price will never be more than 115% of the current reference price. So they've capped it there so that we can't just have a crazy high reference price for PLC. So very general payment calculation for PLC. Once we know what our effective reference price is for the year and the effective price, we can move forward with calculating a payment. So in this example, we have our effective reference price that comes in at $5.50. This is what we just talked about for wheat. And then the effective price, the current projection for wheat for 2019 is coming in at $4.55. So we're going to subtract our effective price from our effective reference price, and that's going to give us our PLC payment rate of 95 cents. So if we have a farm with 100 base acres of wheat, we're going to pay him on 85% of those, which is 85. We're going to multiply his payment acres by his PLC yield on the farm multiplied by that PLC payment rate. So we're going to take his 45 bushel yield multiplied by 95 cents multiplied by our 85 payment acres, and that's going to give him a PLC payment of $3,634 for PLC. Okay, this next slide shows our current rate projections for 2019 PLC. This is current as of January 10th, 2020. We do have this sheet that's updated on our website, which I've included that at the end of this presentation. But this is updated on a monthly basis to show the current price projections for the year for each covered commodity, and it will show the projected PLC payment rates there in the H column. So you can see that for wheat, we are currently looking at a projected payment or a projected price of $4.55, which will mean that we will have a projected PLC payment rate of 95 cents. Barley, we're looking at a projected PLC payment rate of 35 cents. Nothing for oats. You can see all of the current projections here. But you can also see on here that those final marketing year average prices are not published until much later in the year. So the final marketing year average prices for wheat, barley, and oats will not be available until August of 2020. So these could definitely change. The price projections can and will change as the months go on. And I do think that because we have the opportunity for producers to choose their program election on an annual basis, that they're going to be paying a lot closer attention to what these prices are doing, because this might help them to decide which program they want to participate in for the specific year. Like, I would expect that we'll probably see a lot of our wheat going into PLC. Just because they're currently projecting a pretty high PLC payment rate for wheat. But we'll see how that all plays out. So any questions for me on PLC? I haven't seen anything else come up on the screen. Okay. The next program that I'm going to talk about is the Agriculture Risk Coverage Program with the county option. So this program is not just looking at prices, we're actually looking at prices and yields in this program. And this program is going to provide income support looking at county level yields. So we're just looking at the county yields, not the individual yields in this program. So again, what I talked about on a previous slide, those county level yields are established by looking at RMA data first. If RMA data isn't available, we look to Ness. And then finally, if neither of those two sources have yield data, then we will have our state committee establish those yields. As with PLC, you can participate in ARC County and get an ARC County payment even if you do not plant the specific covered commodity. So if you have base acres of wheat on your farm that are enrolled in ARC County and your county triggers an ARC County payment for wheat, then you would receive an ARC County payment even if you did not plant that crop. As with PLC, we will be issuing payments in this program based on 85% of the specific covered commodities base acres, and there is no requirement for producers to do a production report because we are looking at county level yields, not the individual farm yields. ARC County payments are going to trigger when the actual revenue for the year in the county falls below the guaranteed revenue in the county for that specific covered commodity. The guaranteed revenue is going to be 86% of a benchmark revenue that we calculate, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a little bit as well. So as you can see on this slide, we have several steps in calculating an ARC County payment. It's a little bit more detailed and more complex than the PLC program, but our first step is to calculate a benchmark revenue. And to do that, as I've mentioned before, we're going to look at 5 years worth of data. So if we're looking at a 2019 payment, we're going to skip the 2018 crop year and look at data from 2013 to 2017. And when we look at that data, we're looking at yields and prices. So our first step is to calculate an Olympic average yield. And the yields that we use when we calculate that Olympic average are going to be either the actual county yield or a substitute yield, which will be 80% of the T yield in the county. So we do have a substitute yield option available in cases where the county yield is significantly low. So in each year, we're going to take the higher of either the actual county yield or 80% of T. We're going to drop the high and the low values and average the remaining 3, and that's going to give us our Olympic average benchmark yield for this county. Then we do the same thing with the price. We compare the marketing year average price to the effective reference price in each of the 5 years. We drop the high and the low, average the remaining 3, and that's going to give us our Olympic average price. Once we have our Olympic average yield and our Olympic average price, we're going to multiply those together to come up with our benchmark revenue in the county. Once we know our benchmark revenue, we're going to calculate our guarantee by multiplying that value by 86%. And so once we do that, that's our guarantee for Arc County. And what that means is that the actual revenue for the year has to fall below whatever that guarantee is calculated to be in order for an Arc County payment to trigger. The actual crop revenue is calculated by taking the current year yield in the county multiplied by the current year price, and that's going to be either the marketing year average price or the national loan rate, whichever is higher. And then that's how we come up with our actual revenue. Once we know that value, we're going to subtract our actual revenue from our guarantee, and that's going to tell us if there was a revenue loss in the county for that specific crop. If there is a loss, we have to make sure that that loss does not exceed our payment rate cap. So this is a shallow loss program, which means that we're never going to fully compensate a producer for a total loss. We have this payment rate cap that's in place, which is determined by taking 10% of our benchmark revenue, and our payment rate for Arc County can never exceed that 10% of the benchmark revenue. Once we've done that, we will calculate the producer payment. So again, this is a very general payment calculation. I don't go into all of the details here, but just to kind of show you how the payment calculation is going to work, if we calculate a benchmark revenue in this county as being $209.42 per acre, we will then multiply that value by 86%, and that is going to give us our guaranteed revenue in the county of $180.10. So that means that the actual revenue for the year has to be less than $180.10 per acre in order for Arc County to trigger a payment. In this example, we're going to say that the actual revenue came in at $168 an acre. And so we're going to subtract that actual revenue of $168 from our guarantee of $180.10, and that's going to tell us that there was a loss in this county of $12.10 per acre for wheat. So now we have to compare that loss of $12.10 to our payment rate cap. So again, that payment rate cap is 10% of our benchmark revenue, which up here it shows our benchmark revenue of $209.42. So our cap is $20.94. So now we're going to use the lesser of those two values, which in this example is $12.10 per acre. And now we need to calculate our payment for this producer because we know what the payment rate is. So if he had 100 base acres of wheat on his farm, we're going to multiply that by 85% to get us our payment acres of 85. And then we simply multiply our payment acres by our payment rate. So 85 acres times $12.10 is going to give this producer a payment of $1,029 for Arc County. There are a couple of situations that will kind of complicate this payment calculation. One is that irrigated and non-irrigated policy that I discussed with you guys earlier in this presentation. Basically, once a county meets this criteria to have the separate revenues calculated for irrigated and non-irrigated practices, we look at each farm in the county and we establish what we call a HIP. And the HIP is the historical irrigated percentage. We get that by dividing the irrigated acreage of that specific commodity by the total planted acres of that specific commodity during the 2013 to 2017 crop years. So if we had 100 total acres of wheat planted on a farm during those years and 70 of those acres were irrigated, that's going to give us a HIP of 70%. And so what that means for Arc County is that on that farm, 70% of the base acres will be weighted using irrigated revenues and 30% will be weighted using non-irrigated revenues. We're going to summarize those all to the farm level and come up with a unique payment rate for that specific farm. So what that means in general is that in these HIP counties where counties have qualified to have this separate revenues calculated for irrigated and non-irrigated practices, in those cases, each farm could have a unique payment rate calculated depending on what their HIP percentage is on the farm. Another thing that can complicate the ARC County payments is if we have situations where that land is physically located in more than one county. And I kind of already covered this, but basically what that means is if we have a farm with 100 base acres in County A and 100 base acres in County B, we're going to use 50% of the base acres in that example. We're going to weight those using County A's revenues, and the other half of the base acres will be weighted using County B's revenues. And again, we're going to summarize those and come up with a unique payment rate for those farms that meet this criteria as well. I do have detailed payment calculations for both of these scenarios. If you're interested in that, get a hold of Kate and I can get you guys that information. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about the agriculture risk coverage with the individual option. This is a very different program than the other two options. This program is going to be providing income support at the individual farm level. Okay, so we're looking at producers' certified yields in this farm or in this program. Another big difference in this program is that producers are required to plant some covered commodities in order to earn a payment. They don't have to plant what they have base acres for, but they do have to plant covered commodities. We have to have at least 1/100th of an acre planted. Our only exception to that is in cases where 100% of the farm's covered commodities were approved prevent plant. Okay, so if that is the case, then we would pull those prevent plant acres into the ARC-IC payment calculations. This is why we think that there's going to be more ARC-IC participation nationwide this year, is because there's been so many farms that were prevent plant in the Midwest that we're expecting those producers may choose to go into the ARC-IC program. We are not going to issue payments to anyone, even if they're on an enrolled farm, if they do not have a share of the plant and covered commodities on the farm. And one unique thing about this program is that the producer can plant any of the 22 covered commodities, and we're going to offer them the same level of income protection. So if they have base acres of wheat, barley, and corn, and they decide to plant chickpeas and canola, we're still going to offer them the same level of protection under this program. One important thing to understand for ARC-IC is the term ARC-IC farm, or you may also hear this referred to as the ARC-IC bucket. What that means is that if we have a producer participating in ARC-IC, we're going to take their revenues from all ARC-IC enrolled farms in the state, and we're going to put those all in a bucket and determine if overall that producer suffered a loss between all of their ARC-IC enrolled farms. What that means is that if we have a producer who has ARC-IC farms in Madison, Jefferson, and Gallatin counties, they might suffer a significant loss on their Jefferson County farm, but do really well on their Madison County farm, and that loss could be offset by the gain on another farm. Similar to how payments trigger for ARC County, ARC-IC payments are going to trigger when the current year revenue falls below the guaranteed revenue in that producer's ARC-IC farm or their bucket. Some things that we do not include when we calculate our revenue for ARC-IC, we're not going to look at any revenue from farms that are not in the ARC-IC program. So if this producer has other farms that are in PLC, we're not going to look at the revenue from those farms. We're just looking at revenue from ARC-IC farms, and we're also not going to include any crop insurance indemnities. This is a big difference from the previous two programs. If you remember, under ARC County and PLC, payment acres were 85% of the specific covered commodities base acres. For ARC-IC, we're going to take all of the base acres on the farm and add those together, and we're going to pay the producer on 65% of those. That could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the situation. In my example on this slide, we have a farm with 1,500 base acres, and the producer plants 2,000 acres of lentils. He doesn't have base acres of lentils, but that doesn't matter in this program. We're still going to use all of his base acres. We're going to multiply that by 65% and pay him on 975 acres. That same holds true, though, if the producer only plants 1 acre of corn. We're still going to use the full 1,500 base acres times 65% and pay that producer on 975 acres. Payments in the ARC-IC program One thing to understand about these payments is that each producer that participates in ARC-IC is going to have a unique payment rate calculated depending on what is in their bucket. What that means is that we could have two producers on the same farm who might have separate payment rates for ARC-IC. They might be different depending on what else is in their bucket. We've even had situations where one producer on a farm gets a payment and another producer does not. It just depends on if there's revenue from other farms that go into that producer's bucket. The payment steps in ARC-IC are similar to what we just looked at under the ARC County program. Our first step is to calculate a weighted benchmark revenue. So basically, whatever crops this producer plants on their ARC-IC farm, we're going to calculate a benchmark revenue for each one of those crops. So if they plant wheat, barley, and oats, we're going to calculate 3 separate benchmark revenues, and we are going to weight those based on that covered commodities percentage of all the covered commodities planted in their bucket. So we will come up with our weighted benchmark revenue. Then we're going to calculate our guarantee by multiplying that benchmark revenue by 86%. And that's going to give us our guarantee. So that's going to be our baseline for the current year revenue to fall below. Step 3 is to actually calculate that ARC-IC actual farm revenue. And to do that, we're going to take the current year yield, which is certified by the producer, and we're going to multiply that by our current year price, which is going to be the national marketing year average price or national loan rate. That's one important thing to note about this program, is that even though we're looking at the producer's individual yields, we're looking at those same national marketing year average prices that we use in the other programs. Once we know what our guarantee and our actual revenue is, we're going to subtract our actual revenue from the guarantee in step 4 to determine if there was a loss. And again, if there was a loss, we're going to compare that to our payment rate cap, which is 10% of the weighted benchmark revenue. Then we'll determine the producer's payment rate, and we will apply that same payment rate to all of that producer's ARC-IC enrolled farms in the state. If he has 5 farms that are enrolled in ARC-IC, we're going to apply the same payment rate to all 5 of those farms because the payment rate was calculated based on his revenue from all of those farms. So here's a very general payment example again. If we calculate our ARC-IC weighted benchmark revenue to be $250 per acre, our guarantee is going to be 86% of that, which is $215 an acre. So our actual revenue for the year has to fall below $215 per acre in order for this producer to trigger a payment. For example purposes, we're going to say that his actual revenue came in at $190 per acre. So we're going to subtract $190 from $215 to come up with a revenue shortfall of $60 per acre. Now we're going to compare that to our payment rate cap of 10% of our weighted benchmark revenue. So our weighted benchmark revenue is $250 per acre. So 10% of that is $25. So even though this producer suffered a loss of $60 per acre, his payment rate cap is $25 per acre. So we're going to pay him only $25 per acre. So this shows how that payment rate cap can really limit the payments that are going out the door in both of these ARC programs. If in this example our producer has 100 base acres between all of their crops, we're going to pay him on 65% of those, so we're going to pay him on 65 acres. So we're going to simply take our payment acres of 65 multiplied by our payment rate of $25, and then we would apply the producer's share of the covered commodities on the farm, but in this example we're just going to say 100%, and that's going to give him a payment of $1,625 for ARC-IC. So that is a very general overview of these 3 programs. I understand I wasn't able to get really detailed in my payment calculations, and that's just for the sake of time. But as I said, if you guys have more questions and you want to see more detailed payment examples, I'm happy to share that information with you guys. Or if you go into your local county office, they would be happy to share that information with you as well. Since I've covered all of that stuff and there is so much information, I just have a really quick comparison chart here that I'm going to go through, and this will only take a minute, just to kind of summarize everything that we talked about. So as far as the protection that is offered in these 3 programs, for PLC, we're looking at price protection only. ARC County is offering income support using county level yields, and ARC-IC is offering income support using individual farm level yields. For PLC and ARC County, we're going to be issuing payment to any producer who has a share of a crop that's produced on the farm's base acres. For ARC-IC, we're looking strictly at who has a share of the farm's planted covered commodities. For PLC, we are looking at national marketing year average prices and the PLC yield that exists on the farm. For ARC County, we're using those same marketing year average prices and the county level yields. And for ARC-IC, we're using, again, those same national marketing year average prices and the producer's certified yields. For base acres eligible for payment, we're taking our payment for PLC and ARC County. We're using individual covered commodity base acres times 85%. For ARC-IC, we're taking all of the base acres on the farm times 65%. Planting of the covered commodities is not required for PLC or ARC County, but planting of covered commodities is required for ARC-IC. As far as program elections, again, we can mix and match program elections between PLC and ARC County, but for ARC-IC, if they make an ARC-IC election, that applies to all of the covered commodities on their farm. The payment limitation for all three programs is $125,000, and that isn't shared with any other programs. And payments are issued for all of our programs sometime after October 1st of the year following the marketing year of the crop. This last slide that I have for you guys shows our website. This is a website that you can go to look at those PLC price projections. This website also has our ARC County payment rates that have been calculated for the current year and past years. There's just a lot of different program information available on this page. You can sign up for our Gov Delivery. You can get email bulletins. If you sign up for Gov Delivery, you can get our newsletters, and that's just going to have important program information. I think that that's useful for you guys as extension agents as well as for our producers as well. And that is all I have for you guys. I apologize that I went over my time a little bit, I think. Do you guys have any questions for me before I log off for the day?
Hey Amanda, this is Kate. I know we talked about this a little bit before, but we did have a question about sort of what questions you've been getting, and I guess it didn't sound like you had gotten a lot, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about like questions you've been getting in your office or like things you've been talking about at the state office with regard to this farm bill.
Okay.
This is the last one.
Okay. So we have not been getting a ton of producer questions currently, and the reason for that I think is because the programs themselves have not changed significantly from the previous Farm Bill. So producers who participated under the previous Farm Bill, I think, are still kind of familiar with the process. Kind of a hot topic right now is the PLC yield update. So producers are working through that, and counties are getting a lot of questions on yield certifications for that purpose. But kind of the most common question that we get, which is one that you guys probably will get a lot too, is which program should I go into? Which one's going to issue me the most payments? Which is obviously not something that we can answer for them with 100% certainty. But you guys, I know that there are some different tools available, and those are available to producers to use as well. But that seriously is the most common question that we're getting, which we can't really answer. Otherwise, sign up has been going pretty smoothly, except for the fact that we only have about 38% of our farms that have come in so far. Compared to previous year signups. I think part of that is that producers are waiting as long as they can to see where those benchmarks are coming in and kind of what those PLC payment rates are looking like. I'm trying to encourage counties to tell producers to come in and sign up sooner rather than later. They have until March 15th to make their program election. They also have until March 15th to change their program election. So if they come in and sign up for PLC and then decide a couple months, another month down the road now, they could still come in and change their program election to ARC-IC as long as they get in and do that prior to March 15th. So I think that's a big part of the reason why we don't have a ton of questions coming in, is because people just aren't coming in yet. So that's about as good as I can answer that question right now. There is a question here if you guys can get a copy of my PowerPoint. And yes, Kate will get that out to all of you for your use. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Any
Yeah,
other questions for me?
I'll send that out. But if you didn't sign in with your full name, I can't actually see who you are. So if you don't get it, just shoot me an email and I will send it.
Thank you for doing that, Kate.